tempestuous sky was a living snare of lightning. It writhed endlessly from horizon to horizon, threads of molten white and electric blue weaving into a web that had trapped the planet for centuries. The air tasted of scorched metal. The ground was jagged glass, black and sharp, each spire the mark of a lightning strike that had fused sand into brittle teeth. Nothing survived here without bending to the storm's will. Through that killing sky, a prison transport plunged. Inside its bucking hole, chains rattled and bodies slammed against the steel walls. Arik Voss was shackled to a bolted bench, wrists pinned, ankles bound, his knees throbbing from the pain. Every jolt drove the iron cuffs deeper into his skin. His breath came in ragged bursts, the air hot with the stench of sweat and machine oil. Somewhere above, the hull shrieked as another bolt grazed it, peeling molten rivulets across the plate. The storm's roar was deafening, until it wasn't. The sound spiked into a single, sharp note as a bolt the width of the transport spine drove down from the ceiling of clouds. The impact was cataclysmic. Steel screamed, bulkheads twisted, and the world went weightless. Arik's shackles tore free from their mounts. He was flung sideways, colliding with a wall that no longer knew which way was up. Then the hull gave way entirely. The transport split in two, its guts spilling fire and debris into the sea. Arik tumbled into open air, the chain at his ankle snapping against a shard of blast rock as he plunged into a canyon lit by the constant flicker of electric discharge. The ground rushed up and something else with it. It moved like a serpent, but longer than a gunship, its scales metallic, each plate channeling crackling arcs between them. Its eyes burned gold in the lightning light. Thunderworm, apex predator of Tempestra, it hunted by sensing the electric rhythms of its prey, striking with the same fury as the storm that birthed it. And Arik, glowing faintly from the static charge of his fall, was a beacon. It lunged. Arik twisted in midair, but the movement was meaningless. There was nowhere to go. The beast's jaws opened, lined with fangs that sparked as they clamped down. Something else moved. Half buried in the canyon wall, its plating scorched but its form intact, stood a mech, unlike any human design Arik had seen. Sleek, predatory, its armor was an interlocking mesh of living metal that pulsed faintly, veins of cold blue light tracing through its frame. Its eyes, if there were eyes, flared open, twin discs of glacial fire locking onto them. AEGIS-9, Celestine Warframe, the kind whispered about in military briefings, said to be relics of a species that fought with storms as weapons. No human had ever piloted one. None were supposed to exist outside the Ether Council's vaults. The mech stepped forward with a fluidity that was wrong for metal, the movement more like a living thing. Its chest plate split open, revealing a cradle lined with neural ports. Cables uncoiled like seeking tendrils, the ends sparking. Before Arik could flinch away, they struck, latching onto the back of his neck, his wrists, his spine. A flood of current ripped through him, not burning, but burrowing. His vision exploded into fractals of light and shadow. The air vanished. The canyon vanished. For an instant, there was only the storm, every bolt a vein, every cloud a lung. When he blinked, he was inside it. The neural sync completed in less than a second. His pulse slowed to match the mech's. His field of vision widened, overlaid with targeting glyphs in an alien script he somehow understood. He felt the storm's charge not as a threat, but as a source-raw, endless power waiting for command. The Thunderworm was already upon them. The AEGIS moved without thought from him, or maybe it was his thought. He couldn't tell anymore. The mech's arm shot out, plating peeling back to reveal a coil emitter that spat a concentrated surge into the ground. Glass shattered upward in a shockwave, knocking the beast off its trajectory. They landed together, Arik's boots. No, the mech's boots, slamming into the canyon floor. He could feel the weight of the suit in the way the ground cracked under them, but it didn't slow him. The Thunderworm recovered, coiling to strike again. Then the sky tore open. A bolt brighter than the sun speared down, its heatless fury enough to blind him even through the mech's filters. He braced for impact, for pain. Instead, the AEGIS drank it. He felt the current course through the mech's frame into his own nerves, a rush so intense it was almost a high. The coils on its back flared, storing the charge. The blue veins across its armor burned white. A voice, not sound, but vibration in his skull, spoke. "Don't fight the storm." The Thunderworm lunged again, jaws wide. The AEGIS stepped into it, one hand catching the upper jaw, the other the lower. Arcs leapt between the mech's plating and the beast's scales, locking them together in a cage of light. "Take its reins." Arik shifted his stance. The mech servos howled. and a surge from its coils blasted through the thunderworm's body. The predator convulsed, then stilled, eyes dimming. Not dead, tamed. It lowered its head, the arch between them stabilizing into a steady pulse. The canyon was silent except for the hiss of cooling glass. Arek's breath came in sharp pulls, but the mech's systems fed him oxygen, kept his muscles from locking. The voice in his head faded, leaving only the echo of the words and the question they carried. Above, the storm still raged, its web stretching across the heavens. Somewhere beyond those clouds, the Aether Council held the leashes of these storms, and the creatures commanded. He knew their power. He'd seen it used to break armies. So why was a Celestine warframe, the most jealously guarded weapon, buried here, abandoned? And why? Out of every possible host, had it chosen him? The thunderworm shifted beside him, its massive head bowing as if awaiting command. The mech's targeting glyphs hovered in his vision, one icon blinking steadily, an objective marker pointing toward the storm's heart. Arek tightened his grip on the mech's controls, the taste of ozone sharp on his tongue. Somewhere ahead lay answers, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to turn the storm against the ones who thought they owned it. Before Tempestra, before the storm and the machine in his bones, Arek Voss had been a man of tools, not weapons. He'd grown up in the noise and grit of a mining station tethered to a slow-rotating asteroid where everything you owned had to be fixed a dozen times before it broke for good. His father had taught him to listen for faults in the ore processes, the subtle whine in a motor bearing about to spin. Arek had taken that gift further, learning to hear the pulse of electrical systems through the hum in the air, a skill that earned him the nickname Pulse Whisperer before he was old enough to shave. At 18, he left the mines for the uniform. The Interstellar Guard offered more than paid off at escape. In warships and forward bases, his knack for tracing faults in power grids or tuning weapons arrays made him valuable, and for a while he thought he found a place where his skill could protect lives. But wars have a way of changing their shape. The day that Broken began in a maintenance bay, a simple order was due. Bring an orbital cannon online for a scheduled strike. Nothing unusual until he saw the targeting data. The coordinates weren't a fortified enemy position. They were a refugee encampment. The heat signatures in the scan weren't troops. They were clustered, too small. Children. His supervisor told him not to think, just work. Arek locked the weapon down instead, refusing to run the sequence. His refusal didn't stop the strike. Someone else stepped in, and the cannon fired. Encampment burned, but his act of defiance made him a traitor in the guards' eyes. They stripped his rank, branded him an oathbreaker, and shipped him to Tempestra, a world where exile was a slow execution under endless storm. Tempestra made its exiles work if they wanted to live. The planet was ringed in lightning, its surface littered with the wreckage of ships and outposts destroyed by the storm's fury. Amid that graveyard, Arek scavenged to survive, trading stripped wiring and intact circuit boards for shelter. It was on one such scavenge run that he found the warehouse. The building was half collapsed, its roof peeled open by some long-ago strike. Rain sizzling where it touched the melted glass of the floor. Inside, towering shells leaned against each other like drunks, their contents smashed and scattered. But at the far end, still intact in its mount, was something that didn't belong to any human design. A storm. He'd heard of them in whispered conversations among scavengers. The Aether Council used them to control the Thunderworm packs, driving the predators into enemy settlements like living seeds. The nails were colossal conductors, their cores resonating with the same frequencies the beasts used to communicate. With the right signal, a nail could summon or disperse a pack. This one was damaged but not dead. Its outer casing was scorched, but the core still pulsed faintly. Deep, rhythmic thrum he could feel in his teeth. Arek crouched, pulling a multi-tool from his belt. If I can get this out, he muttered to himself, I can power something. The something was parked outside the half-buried form of AEG-IS-9, the Celestine warframe he stumbled on days earlier. He'd managed to link with it in the chaos of the crash, enough to survive a thunderworm attack. But its systems had since gone dormant. Whatever living metal ran its frame needed more than ambient storm energy to wake it. He unfastened the locking clamps on the Stornail's housing, the metal vibrating under his hands. The pulse quickened as if sensing freedom. When he pulled the core free, a jolt ran up his arms, and for a moment, his vision flashed, lightning racing across an alien sky, the shapes of machines towering over cities and land. The image vanished as quickly as it came. He staggered back, clutching the core. It was warm, almost alive. Outside, the rain was falling sideways, the wind carrying a metallic tang of the approaching strike. He crossed the yard to where AEGIS-9 lay like a sleeping beast, its hull streaked with black scorch marks. The Warframe's eyes were dim. Arik knelt at its chest and slid the core into a circular port that had remained sealed until now. The plating folded back with a hiss, accepting the storm nail like a key. The effect was immediate. Blue light surged through the mech's veins, crawling across its limbs. Its eyes flared open, and the neural cables uncoiled again, reaching for him. He hesitated. "If I pilot you," he said aloud, "I become what they want, a weapon." The reply came in that same deep, internal resonance he'd felt during their first link. "A weapon or a shield? It is the hand that decides." He closed his eyes. The memory of the encampment burned behind them. He'd sworn never to be the hand that destroyed the defenseless. But here, on this planet, without the mech, he was just another body waiting to be claimed by the storm. With it, he could fight back, maybe even protect someone. The cables latched on, and the sink began. The freehold of Ashen Hollow was a fragile sanctuary, a cluster of prefab shelters wedged into the shadow of a shattered plateau. It had no walls with the name, only a patchwork of jury-rigged lightning rods to deflect the worst of tempestuous tempers. Children played between the poles when the storm was quiet, their laughter thin but real. Arik had been there 2 days, trading salvaged circuitry for food and a dry place to sleep. The quiet ended at dawn. He heard the wardens before he saw them, a deep, resonant hum that prickled against his nerves, the signature of their storm drives cutting through the air. Then came the shadows, tall and angular, moving with the confidence of predators. Their armor gleamed like wet obsidian, inlaid with channels of shifting light. Each carried a weapon that doubled as a conductor, the tips crackling. They didn't come to negotiate. The first bolt slammed into one of the lightning poles, overloading it in a blinding flash. Panic tore through the camp. Arik caught sight of their objective immediately, the storm keystone, a humming sphere housed in the settlement's central generator. Its resonance kept the storms in this sector from flattening Ashen Hollow entirely. Without it, the settlement would be erased in hours. 3 wardens moved straight for it, scattering the few armed settlers with casual blasts of controlled lightning. Behind them, a handler loomed astride a thunderworm, its body coiled and ready to strike. The beast's scales danced with arcs that mirrored the pulse of the handler's gauntlet. Arik's hand went to the neural jack at his neck. He didn't want this fight, but there was no time for debate. He sprinted toward the ridge where AEGIS-9 lay camouflaged beneath a tarp of scavenged plating. The moment he touched the frame, the mech came alive. Cables whipped out, latching to his ports. A surge roared through him, the storm outside becoming a match in his mind. His vision fractured into shards of memory, battlefields lit by arc fire, alien skies above cities of crystal before snapping into clarity. "Sync complete," the HUD whispered an alien script he could read without learning. Glyphs flared. Subdue, protocol, availables. The order unfolded in his mind like instinct. The mech could emit a counterphase burst to disrupt the neural resonance between a handler and their thunderworm, flipping the predator's allegiance in an instant. AEGIS-9 rose, plates shifting into combat configuration. The storm outside welcomed him back like an old friend, coiling around his limbs, feeding power into him. He launched from the ridge, the ground cracking under the impact. The first warden didn't see him until a magnetic cable lashed out, coiling around its torso. With a yank, Arik hauled it into the air, directly into a descending bolt. The strike lit the plateau in white fire, the warden's armor locking in place as systems fried. The thunderworm turned at the sound, its head rising, scenting him through the static. The handler drove it forward, arcs racing along its length. Arik raised his arm. The emitters along the AEGIS's forearm flared, releasing a pulse that rippled through the storm itself. He felt it hit the beast's nervous system, saw the flicker in its eyes as its handler's control shattered. The arcs along its scales shifted to match his own suit's frequency. The massive head lowered, not in attack, but submission. The wardens hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks. Arik didn't give them time to regroup. He signaled the thunderworm forward, the ground trembling under its coils. Together they hit the warden line, the mech's blades of focused lightning cutting arcs through their formation. Each strike came at a cost. The first overload left his left hand tingling. The second, his entire arm went numb. He could feel the mech compensating, rerouting signals, but the feedback was chewing into his nerves. The alien voice from the sync core stirred. The bearer of the armor carries both its strength and its curse. Should you falter, the storm will claim your soul. He gritted his teeth, forcing the thought aside. Not today. The fight collapsed into chaos. One warden fell under the thunderworm's crushing coils, another was flung into a lightning pole, the ensuing discharge vaporizing it in a burst of ozone. The survivors broke, retreating into the safety of the storm's curtain, but they didn't leave empty-handed. Arik saw too late their leader had the keystone. The warden vaulted onto a skimmer and vanished into the maelstrom, the hum of its engine merging with the storm. The camp was left in ruin. The lightning poles were twisted wreckage, shelters smoking. The settlers stared at him from behind overturned crates and shattered walls, not just with gratitude, but with wariness. The sight of a man walking alongside a thunderworm was not something easily forgotten. Then the loudspeakers crackled. The voice was cold, amplified by the storm's own resonance. Oathbreaker Voss, it declared in the trade tongue, every syllable laced with contempt. Thief of the AEGIS, enemy of the Council, your crimes and your face are known across Tempest. Run while you can. A holographic image shimmered into the storm above the plateau. His face, his guard identification, and the tribunal record of his refusal to fire. The truth twisted into a weapon against him. The settler's eyes shifted again. Gratitude bled into fear. Association with him now meant death when the wardens returned. Arik stood in the center of the wreckage, the thunderworm coiled at his side, its eyes still mirroring his suit's glow. Rain hissed against the mech's armor, running down into the scorched dirt. They wanted me to be a weapon, he murmured to himself. Fine, but not for them. The alien voice rumbled in reply, not with words, but with the pulse of the storm itself. The sky over Haven Ridge was already boiling when Arik arrived. Lightning spidered across the storm's underbelly, casting jagged shadows over the settlement's sloped terraces. Haven Ridge wasn't much, just a series of steel platforms bolted into the side of a cliff, linked by narrow walkways, but its position made it strategically vital. From here, the rebels could monitor half a dozen storm lanes and guard one of the few routes to the high point. Without it, the freeholds below would be wide open to the wardens. He reached the overlook just as the first of them emerged from the storm. The wardens came in formation, their armor gleaming black in the flicker of the sky. At their flanks slithered 4 thunderworms, each longer than a gunship, their scales charged with the council's signature resonance. Behind them, in a sealed carrier bristling with lightning rods, was the stolen storm. Even from this distance, Arik could feel its hum, a deep, alien heartbeat that tugged at the storm overhead. They're hitting the western gates first, a rebel spotter shouted, voice cracking over the wind. If they break through there, they won't, Arik said, and he was already moving. AEGIS-9 waited at the ridge's edge, its living metal rippling with anticipation. He stepped into the cradle and felt the neural cables bite into his ports. Sync came fast this time, a familiar rush of heat and clarity. The storm's map unfolded in his mind, every bolt a path, every charge a weapon waiting to be claimed. But there was no room for restraint. Not today! Oversync available! The HUD pulsed in a pale glint. Arik hesitated only for a heartbeat. Then he triggered it. The world snapped into a sharper focus than he'd ever known. His own heartbeat slowed, each thud a deep drumbeat in the background. Every raindrop fell in crystalline arcs, every flicker of lightning froze long enough for him to trace its path. The line between himself and AEGIS-9 dissolved. He was the mech was him. He stepped off the ridge, landing in a spray of shattered stone that rang like a gong through the cliffside. The thunderworms turned as one, their handlers shouting commands through the storm's chorus. But Arik was already moving. The first beast lunged, mouth gaping. He sidestepped, a fluid motion that flowed into a sweeping arc of his arm. AEGIS's coils flared, catching a bolt from the sky and bending it along his forearm. In his hands, the lightning became a blade, its edge white-hot. One clean slash along the thunderworm's jaw sent it reeling, arcs scattering off its scales in erratic bursts. "Pull them back!" a warden barked, but Arik pressed forward, the storm following him like a tethered beast. He opened the subdue protocol, sending a counter-phase pulse that rippled through the air like invisible thunder. 2 of the thunderworms faltered mid-charge, their handless commands cutting off in bursts of static. They swung toward him, no longer enemies but extensions of his will. "Circle the ridge," he commanded, the mech's voice carrying through the link. The tamed beasts slithered into position, coiling around the settlement's perimeter. Their scales flared, weaving a net of constant arcs between them. The lightning formed a barrier, a living Faraday cage that turned every incoming bolt into a harmless crawl along their bodies. The wardens realized too late that the fight was no longer theirs to control. Arik advanced through their line, the borrowed beasts at his side. Each step was punctuated by the rhythmic hammer of lightning strikes he called down with a gesture, splitting the storm's fury into blades and spears that cut with surgical precision. Somewhere on the upper terrace, a rebel fighter called out to him over the comms. "You're pushing too far. Eric, your eyes." He ignored it, driving his shoulder into a warden's chest plate and discharging a blast point blank. The enemy's armor locked up instantly, its power channels frying from the overload. Another rebel's voice cut in, urgent and sharp. "He's changing." His eyes aren't human anymore. He found himself answering without thinking. "If I stay the same, we all die." The words felt true in the cold, detached space of the In this state, every choice was just data, every enemy just an obstacle to be removed. The last of the hostile thunderworms tried to break for the Keystone carrier. Arik moved faster, vaulting over debris and catching the beast by the throat. His mech's coils wrapped it in a cage of white fire until its eyes dimmed and its body sagged. He dropped it without ceremony and turned to the carrier. "Me!" One gesture, and the storm obeyed. A single bolt as thick as a tree trunk slammed into the vehicle, blowing its roof open in a spray of molten metal. Rebels surged forward to reclaim the Keystone, their cheers barely audible over the storm's roar. It should have been the end. But as Arik turned to track the retreating wardens, a flicker of warning flashed across his face. He pushed the oversink past safe thresholds. The numbness began in his left hand, spreading up his arm. The suit compensated, but the delay was enough for a stray bolt, reflected from a collapsing lightning rod, to slip past the barrier. It struck the lower terrace. The explosion lit the cliffside, and a column of fire rose with the settlement's food source. The blast flung metal and ash into the air, the acrid smell of burning grain cutting through the ozone. Rebels shouted in shock and anger. Arik staggered, the oversink still holding him upright, vision blurred. He forced the storm to heal, calling the barrier back in around Haven Ridge. The wardens, sensing their opening had closed, melted into the curtain of rain, their retreat swallowed by the night sky. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of rain on scorched steel. He deactivated the oversink. The clarity vanished, replaced by the weight of his own body, the heaviness in his limbs. The numbness lingered in his arm. The rebels gathered, some clapping him on the shoulder in thanks, others keeping their distance. Their eyes told the truth. Their words didn't. They'd seen the blast hit the granaries. They didn't know, or didn't care, that it had been an accident. To them, it was proof that the storm's fury was too wild to trust, even in his hands. A boy no older than 12 stood apart from the others, watching him with wide, unsettled eyes. Arik felt the weight of that gaze more than any glare from the adults. The tamed thunderworms uncoiled from the barrier, their arcs dimming as they settled around him. He could still feel their pulse through the mech's link, loyal now in a way they'd never be to the wardens. But the loyalty of beasts meant little if the people he was fighting for started to doubt him. Somewhere deep in AEGIS-9's neural core, the Celestine voice murmured, quiet, almost like a reminder to itself. The bearer must choose, control the storm or become it. Arik closed his eyes, rain running down the mech's plating, mixing with the faint heat from the battle. He had won Haven Ridge, but he'd also felt how easy it was to let the oversink strip everything away except the fight. When he opened his eyes again, the boy was gone, swallowed into the crowd. Under the bruised violet sky of Tempestra, the storms never slept. Lightning crawled through the clouds like veins of molten glass, and the air stank of ozone and scorched stone. Arik Voss stood on the shattered precipice of Haven Ridge, AEGIS-9's plates humming and stared across the jagged expanse toward the citadel of ether. Every storm seemed to pulse in sync with his heartbeat now. He knew the source. He knew the hand holding the whip, and he knew the hand belonged to his own blood. The comlink crackled with static, then cleared just enough to let a cold, disciplined voice slip through, one he hadn't heard in over a decade. "Arik Voss," the voice said, "you've become a stain on the record. Stand down, and you may yet keep your life." The title was official, tactical executive, Voss. Half, brother by blood, but raised on opposite sides of a fault line. While Arik had grown in the grinding gears of asteroid docks, Kerr had been sharpened by the ether. The connection was confirmed when the warden's feeds began broadcasting Kerr's image to every corner of Tempestra. The iron mask, the pale scar under the right eye, and the voice that could cut through steel. "Kerr," Arik said into the open channel, his voice low enough the wind almost stole it away. "You don't have to do this." The reply was immediate, without hesitation. "It's already done. The perennial tempest is live." Arik's stomach dropped. Perennial tempest wasn't a weapon. It was annihilation. A self-sustaining storm lattice that would scour every untagged biosignature from the planet. rendering it uninhabitable to anything not sanctioned by Aether's mark. The very air and ground would become a killing field. Only Kerr's command could halt it. Arik took a step forward, storms flaring at the edge of his vision. You can stop it. And what then? Kerr's tone was almost pitying. Let the ungoverned tear this planet apart? Let chaos fester until it breeds another war? No, you've already chosen your side, and it isn't mine. Aegis 9's neural interface pulsed against Arik's spine, the machine's voice slipping into his thoughts. He cannot be reasoned with. His control is absolute. Remove him, and the storm dies. Arik's hands tightened against the gauntlet. He could feel the mech reading his intent, cueing sequences he'd never dared to unlock. But the thought coiled in his gut. To save millions, he would have to kill his own brother. The image of Kerr from years ago flashed in his mind. A boy barely taller than a wrench smirking in the finger shadows. Handing Arik a stolen ration bar, that moment of kinship was the last before Aether claimed him. If you kill me, Kerr said suddenly as though reading the hesitation, you'll become the monster they always wanted. And when you do, Aether wins, with or without me. The words cut deeper than the lightning ever could. Wind howled across the ridge, bringing with it the distant sound of thunderworm roars. Aether's hounds! Closing. Arik's jaw locked. If I don't stop you, Kerr, then no one will have a future to argue about. The decision clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Arik triggered the deepest override in Aegis 9 systems, self-detonate sync. The interface flared, spines of energy driving into his nervous system. His breath caught as the pain surged through every nerve. His heartbeat became the storm's drum. What are you doing? Kerr's voice snapped across the channel, edged with something Arik had never heard before. Ending this. The mech systems reconfigured, drawing in charge from every lightning strike within miles. Thunderworms on the horizon froze mid-charge, instinctively sensing the predator in the storm's heart. The sky above Haven Ridge darkened as clouds twisted into a spiral, feeding into the mech's capacity. Arik felt his memories slipping, faces of people he'd saved, moments of laughter in the mining dock, even the warmth of sunlight burning away under the overload. One strike, Aegis whispered. One chance to sever the keystone. Kerr's silhouette appeared in the distance, framed by the jagged spire of the world keystone. The central nexus of the perennial tempest. Arik launched forward, each step leaving glassed footprints in the obsidian ground. Wardens swarmed to block his path, their armor sparking under stray arcs from the mech. But none could stand against the force driving him forward. He reached the final stretch, Kerr raising his own weapon, a storm-forged glaive crackling with lethal power. The clash was instant and brutal, lightning clashing between them, each blow shattering the ground beneath their feet. You can't save them all, Kerr shouted, voice raw now, his precision gone. Then I'll save enough to matter, Arik roared back. With a final surge, he let go. All the stored charge in Aegis 9 flooded through the mech's core, channeled into a single titanic strike aimed at the keystone. The sky split open with a scream of pure light. The blast tore through the spire, shattering its crystalline metal. The perennial tempest's network flickered, then collapsed. The storms howled in disarray, breaking apart into harmless rain clouds for the first time in centuries. When the light faded, Arik was on his knees, armor smoking, the mech systems dead silent. Kerr lay a few meters away, breathing but unconscious, his weapon shattered beside him. The air was eerily still. Somewhere far below, people would be stepping outside to see a sky that no longer wanted them dead. Arik looked up at the first patch of blue he'd ever seen on Tempestra. It felt wrong to call it victory. It felt like survival at a cost he couldn't yet measure. His hands shook as he powered down the mech's husk. Aegis, he whispered, unsure if it could still hear him. Was it worth it? No answer. Only the soft patter of rain on scorched armor. The rain on Tempestra felt wrong. After centuries of endless tempests, the first soft drops fell without the weight of thunder behind them. The clouds above were breaking, revealing slashes of pale sunlight that painted the jagged terrain in unfamiliar gold. People emerged cautiously from the wreckage of their shelters, faces lifted toward the sky as though afraid it might vanish. For the first time in generations, the storms had stopped. The fall of the perennial tempest had shattered Aether's grip on the planet. Without the storm network, the Wardens, once untouchable enforcers, found themselves cut off from command and surrounded by the very citizens they had ruled. Some laid down arms. Others fled into the wilderness, stripped of the authority their armor once represented. Across cities and settlements, word spread, Aether was gone. Freedom A word that had always been whispered was now shouted in the open. But on the ridge where the final strike had fallen, victory looked far less glorious. AGIS-9 lay in pieces, its once sleek armor now twisted and blackened, the mech's neural core cracked beyond repair. Its plating still steamed from the overload Arak had forced it through, and the faint smell of scorched circuitry hung in the air. He sat beside the wreck, hands resting on knees, every movement aching. His skin was clammy, his vision blurred at the edges. More than exhaustion weighed on him, he could feel the absence. The bond with AEGIS-9 was gone. Where once he'd felt the hum of energy in the air, the pull of storms in the sky, there was now only emptiness. The sensory thread that had connected him to the lightning was severed, leaving a silence that felt louder than the battles ever had. He glanced down at his chest where the armor had split open during the final surge. Burned into his skin was the shape of a branching lightning strike, a dark, jagged scar that pulsed faintly in his heart. He traced it with his fingers and felt no power there, only pain. Footsteps approached, small and hesitant. A boy no older than 12 stood a few meters away, clothes patched and face streaked with dirt. He carried a battered satchel and the wary gaze of someone who had survived 2 months. "You're the one who stopped it," the boy said, as if unsure whether it was safe to believe his own words. Arak managed a faint smile. "I just broke something that needed breaking." The boy stepped closer, glancing at the ruined mech. "They said you could command the storms, that you could call lightning from the sky." Arak's gaze drifted back to the blackened armor. "I could," he admitted. "Not anymore." There was a long pause. The boy kicked at the dirt, then looked up again, his voice quiet but cutting. "If you could have that power back, would you use it?" Arak met his eyes. The question landed heavier than any weapon. Memories flooded, lightning tearing through enemy ranks. The sheer thrill of holding the storm in his hands, the way it had made him feel unstoppable. But alongside it came the other memories, the way AEGIS-9's voice had merged with his thoughts until he couldn't tell. Where the machine ended and he began, the temptation to keep pushing the limits just to see how far they could go, and Kerr's voice telling him that killing his own brother would make him the monster Ether wanted. He exhaled slowly. "Only," he said, "if I was certain it wouldn't turn me into the kind of person I fought to stop." The boy nodded, as if that answer made sense to him in a way it might not to others. Then he turned and walked back toward the growing crowd in the distance, leaving Arak alone with the mech's husk and the scar that would never fade. Around him, life was already beginning to shift. The once silent markets were filling with voices, people trading not just goods but plans for rebuilding. Farmers spoke of reclaiming the storm-scoured plains. Engineers began sketching wind harvesters not as weapons, but as power sources for homes. Yet Arak knew the danger hadn't vanished. Freedom was fragile, and without the storms to unite them in survival, old rivalries could resurface. The collapse of Ether was a beginning, not an ending. As the sun slid lower in the sky, he pushed himself to his feet, wincing as emotion tugged at the scar. He placed a hand on AEGIS-9's broken core, feeling nothing in return. "We did it," he murmured, "but not without cost. Somewhere in the distance, lightning flickered harmlessly along the horizon, a reminder that the storms had not truly died, only been freed from control. Arak turned away from the ridge and began the long walk down into the valley, each step carrying him further from the man who had commanded the tempests, and closer to whoever he would have to become without them. They still spoke his name in the streets of Tempestra, but not as the storm wielder who tore down the wardens. To the elders, Arak had become a cautionary tale. They told the story in low, steady voices to their children, of a man who had bent lightning to his will, only to learn that such power could strip away the last pieces of what made a person human long before it destroyed their enemies. In these retellings, the battles were shorter, the victories smaller, and the weight of the choice he had made heavier. Some said he had been a hero, others swore he was a warning wrapped in a man's skin. No one told it the same way twice, but one truth was constant. He had faced the kind of choice no one wanted to imagine. The world he had saved was different now. The air no longer trembled with the constant growl of storms, and the horizon was no longer swallowed by clouds. The markets were loud with life. Farmers had returned to the fields, and children dared to run far from their parents without fear of the warden's patrols. Yet whenever lightning flashed in the far distance, even harmlessly, people would glance at the sky, their faces tightening for just a moment, remembering. Arak stayed away from the crowded streets. He walked the cliffs instead, following the jagged ridges where the storms used to smash against the rock. It was here that he felt closest to the truth of what had happened, where the wind still carried the faint scent of ozone, and where the quiet felt almost too loud. He carried with him a fragment of AEGIS-9's armor, a warped plate no larger than his palm. It had once been part of the chest where the mech's neural core sat, the link between his mind and the living storm. Now it was only scorched metal, edges sharp, weight deceptively light. He kept it in his hand as he walked, feeling its cold bite against his fingers. He remembered Kerr's face in that final moment, not the mask of the warden commander, but the flicker of the boy he'd once known, the brother who had looked out for him when no one else had. The voice still came back to him sometimes, carried on the wind. You'll become a monster if you kill me. That's how ether wins. And he remembered the way his own voice had broken when he told Kerr he could stop, that he didn't have to be what they made him. The choice had nearly split him apart. In the end, he had found another way, but it had cost him everything that had made him what he was in battle. He had told himself it was worth it. He still told himself that, even when the emptiness in his chest felt too wide. But deep down, he knew there was a question he could never answer with certainty. If there had been no other way, if killing Kerr had been the only path, would he have done it? It was the same question that now passed from mouth to mouth in the rebuilt settlements. If, to save a world, you had to kill the only family you had left, would you? No one gave the same answer twice. Some swore they would choose the world without hesitation. Others said family was worth more than any cause. A few admitted they didn't know. And perhaps that was the point, that some questions weren't meant to have easy answers. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the still calm sky, Arik climbed the tallest outcrop of stone of the valley. From here he could see everything, the patchwork of fields, the clusters of homes, the glimmer of water cutting through the land. And far beyond, near the horizon, the thunderworm moved. Once a terror of the storms, the great serpent of living lightning now glided slowly around a solitary boat. The clouds, coiling and uncoiling, as if it were no more dangerous than a river winding through the earth. It hadn't attacked since the fall of the perennial tempest. Some believed it was finally free, like the people. Others whispered it was only waiting. Arik tightened his grip on the broken armor plate, the edges digging into his palm. The metal caught the fading sunlight, flashing briefly like a shard of lightning. He thought about the bond he'd had with AEGI's 9, the raw, intoxicating rush of holding the storm in his hand, of feeling untouchable. He thought about how close he had come to letting that power make his choices for him. And he thought about the quiet now, the stillness in his mind where the storm had once lived. He spoke aloud, though no one was there to hear him. True strength isn't controlling the storm, he said softly. It's keeping yourself when the storm lives inside your head. The wind carried his words away over the cliffs. Below, the valley glowed with the first lights of evening. Above, the sky remained clear, the stars beginning to pierce the fading dusk. The people would tell his story again tomorrow, and the day after that, each version shifting like the clouds had once shifted above them. Maybe they'd remember the battles, or the machine, or the final strike that broke the storm. Or maybe, if he was lucky, they'd remember the warning. He turned from the edge, the scar on his chest aching faintly with the movement. The thunderworm's slow, graceful coil shimmered in the distance, a living reminder that storms, whether in the sky or in the mind, could be tamed, but never truly destroyed. And with that thought, Arik walked back toward the darkness gathering in the valley, ready to live in the quiet he had fought so hard to create.